Hello, welcome to Coach.Win's webinar series. I'm super excited to have Scott Anderson with me today. He's a longtime friend, and he also helped me with my business. He's helped a ton of my business friends with a lot of different things. So, an introduction. Good to have you here, Scott, all the way from Italy, I guess. So that's kind of fun as well. So why don't you introduce yourself and go into your presentation for the day?
Thanks a lot. Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Great to see you. And unfortunately, I tend to see some of my favorite people more on Zoom than in person. But anyway, it's great to see you. So yeah, I want to talk about an issue that's really affected me a lot, and that affects so many entrepreneurs and coaches also, and that is burnout. And I know that your crowd, like all entrepreneurs, have short attention spans and don't have much time. So I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here. I have something that I'd be very happy to send anybody who's interested, and it's called an Entrepreneur's Burnout Toolkit. And in it, there are various, literally, tools to help you break through burnout. And we have an extensive program that's been proven effective in helping entrepreneurs break through burnout. But burnout does not seem to be optional. It seems to be mandatory for entrepreneurs. And it's just a question of when it'll happen and how long you stay in it. And so anyway, if you want the Entrepreneur's Toolkit, there's a whole bunch of really useful things that you can use today to help break through burnout. And if you want to get it, just email me at scott@doubledareyou.us and I'll send it to you.
That's great.
The reason that I'm so interested in burnout is that about 8 years ago, when I sold the largest of the businesses that I started, an advertising agency, I went into a real tailspin, or I was actually burned out before I was selling it. And as I was selling it, it was just really a grim experience, not what I expected. It sold okay monetarily and so on, but it was just not a pleasant experience. Anyway, I went into a giant, and you'll probably relate to that, John, having been through a couple of those. It's kind of like a boat. The best day is the second best day is the day that you buy the boat, and the best day is when you sell the boat. But in my case, it was selling the boat wasn't much fun either. And anyway, I found myself in a terrible tailspin, and I found that I was exhausted all the time, and would wake up exhausted even after a good night's sleep. I was irritable and biting people's heads off, and was just really finding it hard to get the groove back and to gain some momentum and to perform in a way that I was really used to performing. And in addition to being a coach and an entrepreneur, I'm also a licensed mental health therapist. So as I was going through this, I went back to everything I learned in graduate school and talked to lots and lots of my colleagues and found almost nothing about burnout from a standpoint of empirically proven techniques. There's a lot written about who has it and how many people have it and what it's like, but comparatively little written about what the hell do you do about it. And so, in fact, included in this burnout toolkit are some empirically proven techniques that I've been able to discover over the last 8 years. But fortunately, and I was like a blind pig looking for a truffle, I guess, but as we do in Italy right now. But I really didn't know how to get myself out of this, and was willing to do anything to get out of it, because I was really concerned that one day maybe I'd wake up and I wouldn't have the energy or the enthusiasm to do anything anymore. It was really getting that scary. And fortunately, I stumbled into some things that really, really worked. And I tried them on some willing volunteers, my guinea pigs, as I call them, a group of Omaha entrepreneurs. And we started out as a face-to-face group. And we found that the group concept is really very useful because there's one of the big symptoms of burnout is a deep sense of isolation, and that there's nobody to talk to, and that I can't talk to anybody and don't want to talk to anybody. what we found is that by using some of the techniques I'm going to talk about today and some that are included in this toolkit, and especially by being together with other people who are going through the same thing, especially other entrepreneurs who don't usually like to confess to weakness and despair. What I found was when we got together, just getting together made a big difference, and being able to talk about it, especially with different people in different stages of recovery, and so the newcomers could see that the old timers were making progress, and you could get out of this. Anyway, so I was just delighted to find that something did work, and I basically compiled everything that we tried in these face-to-face groups and created a program called Burnout Breakthrough that I'll talk a little bit about today.
Excellent.
First, I want to just we have a online burnout assessment, and that's the other thing that you can get by emailing you. And the gold standard for burnout diagnosis is something called the Maslach Burnout Inventory, and we've created a online survey that's the Maslach inventory is about 250 questions and hard to interpret. So we've created a shorter, sleeker version online. You can pretty much get a self-diagnosis in 15 minutes. So I asked people to do that. And if they email me, I'll send them the link to do that. And the assessment the results that people will get are scores anywhere from 15 to 75. And 15 to 32 means you probably don't have much burnout in your life. But if you get above, say, 35, then the signs and the likelihood that you're suffering from burnout is it grows increasingly likely. And the people that I work with typically have a score north of 50. I've talked to a number of people this week with a score north of 60. And these are folks that are really feeling bad. And there's part of it feels like depression, part of it feels like anxiety, but part of it is, I mean, it's really, it's different. It really is different than that. It's partially has those symptoms, but there's some very distinct symptoms we'll talk about. So I'm gonna get past that. Briefly as an introduction, I'm a serial entrepreneur and have the scars to prove it. I've run and sold 9 businesses, coached hundreds of entrepreneurs and high performance executives and teams. I am a licensed mental health therapist, but the most important thing about what I'll say today relates to having broken through my own burnout and that it's never returned, thank God. So that's the main thing that I want to talk about, especially if anybody who hears this is burned out. There's definitely a way out, and a relatively quick way, and a permanent solution.
Nice.
So I want to go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's really interesting. I think I've known the feeling.
Yes, I think we all have. So I'm going to talk quickly about five quick things here. The first is the costs of burnout, because the costs are enormous, especially for entrepreneurs. Second is the opportunity for competitive advantage, especially if you can diagnose and treat burnout within your company with your employees. The third, I'm going to talk about symptoms. Fourth, most importantly, about treatments. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And don't stand on ceremony. If there's anything you want to ask John, just blurt it out.
Got it.
So burnout is, even though the term has been around since the 70s, when a psychologist coined it, he was ironically, he was studying nurses and doctors in ER rooms, and what he was really talking more about empathy fatigue, where people just were exposed to so much trauma that they weren't able to conjure up any empathy after a while, and that was the original definition of burnout. But the World Health Organization, which has codified burnout as an actual disorder, calls burnout exhaustion at work from chronic stress. And I would say unrelieved stress is really the key there. Disconnection from one's job and negativity or cynicism. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. But what results from it And a lot of times I talk to people who say they've got super high anxiety or they're very depressed, but usually those are outcomes of burnout um, more than the burnout itself. But it's very typical for people to feel anxious, depressed, there to be marital issues and parenting issues. In its worst form, there can be substance abuse, even suicide around burnout. So it's a very serious thing. Pre-COVID, 23%. Gallup has run a poll forever on burnout or work fatigue, and pre-COVID, just about for many years in a row, the score was 23% reporting always and 44% reporting sometimes. But post-COVID, the score doubled to 45% always in April 2020 and 60% always in September of 2020. This is according to Korn Ferry. And even with the so-called recovery from COVID, if that's what we have, burnout has not gone down at all. If anything, it's actually going up. It's especially important because most of the workforce now is millennials. Certainly my employees and probably yours are mainly millennials. 53% of millennials reported being burned out pre-pandemic, and they remain the most affected population through 2021 at least, with 59% reporting feeling burned out most of the time. So the problem, of course, apart from the personal cost as managers of businesses, what we see is negative engagement, not just no engagement, but a adversarial, negative, active disengagement. Certainly a drop in productivity. It becomes more and more difficult to recruit people into your company if you're burned out or if there's prevalent burnout within your company. Turnover increases. And in a market where talent is king, this is obviously a big problem. 50% of turnover is due to burnout, according to Gallup.
Wow.
It's the fundamental, it's I believe, where so much of the trust problems that are at the core of turnover, not trusting your direct supervisor, comes from burnout, and probably less so to do with trust. That's my theory anyway. It's 62% of. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, just going back to one of the other slides about suicide. I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons that the entrepreneur organization, which I'm involved with, was founded,
Exactly.
was that
That's right.
Was like what 7 or 8 friends. All of a sudden, one guy killed himself, and they had no idea what he was living through, and and we were a little bit reluctant to share, right? Being the proud.
Exactly.
And they were so shocked.
Exactly.
They're like, we got to start having better communication, right? I mean, that was part of how the entrepreneurs organization got started. So
that's right. That's right. And
it's a real issue.
It's one of the reasons why EO and similar organizations, but specifically EO, is such a valuable organization, is that you share the top 5% and the bottom 5% as a matter of course. And that's what we've really found. I found in my practice is that to get people to talk to one another and admit to some of these feelings, and first of all realize that they're not alone and they're not going crazy, but that these things are predictable and very specific symptoms of burnout. It really helps to have somebody else to talk to, but particularly a group of peers. So this is kind of interesting for me, at least. 2020 was the best year ever for a lot of my clients, in spite of COVID. It was one of my best years. Actually, the last couple have been great too. The question is it sustainable to work the way that we've been working? And Christine Maslach, who's pretty much accepted as the world authority on burnout, describes the pace of work today as sprint as marathon, where there is no tape to cross. Basically, we just keep sprinting and sprinting and sprinting. And instead of going into sprints and then having a time to recover, a sprint is kind of the order of the day for a lot of companies, and especially in smaller entrepreneurial companies. And it's not sustainable is the problem. The good news is that burnout is definitely extinguishable, and this is there's a lot in the literature about the scientific literature about specifically what it takes. I've had to dig, but I found it. And also through my own experience, I found some techniques that really, really work. It's very possible to relatively quickly and permanently extinguish burnout. But the challenge is that it requires some counterintuitive thinking that's especially counterintuitive for entrepreneurs. Burnout is also preventable, and this is one of the things that I really preach to my own clients, is that if you can create a culture and an atmosphere, or that it is possible to create a culture that that does prevent burnout. If you can teach people what burnout is and how to avoid it, the chances of them remaining free of burnout go up a lot, but also turnover goes down. Your Glassdoor scores get better as a recruiter. And so this is another thing I'll talk more about, but not only is it extinguishable, but it's also preventable. But burnout won't just go away. That's the problem. And I've talked to people who have taken vacations, and even people who have taken sabbaticals. I had one client in Poland who took a 6-month sabbatical, and she was even more burned out by the end of the sabbatical than she was before. And the idea a lot of us have is, well, if I got a good night's sleep or a long weekend or a week of vacation or whatever, then I'll feel better. And you might temporarily, but unfortunately, burnout is an inside job, and it's really not about. This is a little bit controversial, but I mean, certainly, if you're working in a culture that is toxic or unjust or, I don't know, racist or sexist or whatever, you should run away screaming. But most of the solution to burnout doesn't have to do with the work itself. Because I've had a lot of clients who have quit jobs, taken other ones, and they're just as burned out as they were before. So burnout is an inside job, and it has less to do with the workplace than we think it does. And it has a lot more to do with characteristics that most of us, a lot of entrepreneurs anyway, bring to work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of creating a culture that acknowledges burnout, not rolling around in it and creating a culture where it's okay to miss weeks and months of work, for FMLA or whatever, but to teach skills that really will reduce negative engagement, reduce mental health days, and reduce the harm to your reputation potentially as a sweatshop. If we tackle this head on, much in the same way that we give flu shots to our employees sometimes, or many of us have brought nurses in to give flu shots, burnout can be treated in as much of a matter-of-fact way as the flu can. So the competitive advantage of mastering burnout, not only we entrepreneurs and founders of businesses, but our teams, will improve recruiting, productivity, innovation, net promoter scores, recruiting, retention, etc. So the skills that are proven to maximize health, engagement, productivity also create competitive advantage. And today, when there's such a battle for talent, not only do we want to claw back the productivity that's lost to people who are burned out, but we also want to ensure that our company has a reputation as being healthy, and not just in words, but in actions. And this is what I mean by burnout being preventable. So I'll talk a little bit about what it is and what the skills are. So burnout is, as the World Health Organization says, it's basically three things. It's an exhaustion that won't go away with a good night's sleep. It's a feeling of disconnection from work and coworkers and clients and customers and partners and shareholders that used to be deep relationships. There's now a feeling of being really disconnected and possibly misunderstood. There's a tendency also to feel like a bit of a victim. I hear this from a lot of my clients, in the sense I had as well. And the third is, and this is at the crispiest edges of burnout, is that it isn't just feeling isolated internally. There's more external expression of negativity, cynicism, irritability, frustration, snapping people's heads off, etc. And by the time you get to that point, the canary in the coal mine has really died, and you, you've got burnout. And this can cause irreparable harm, especially if we are the owners of our businesses. You only need to behave this way for a while, and you'll lose your team, whether they quit or not. So when we talk about exhaustion, what we're talking about is an overactivated hormonal, metabolic, immune, and cardiovascular systems as they fail to return to normal. And so the adrenaline and cortisol and the whole host of chemicals in our bodies that are released when we're under stress don't return to normal, and they stay at a highly activated state. And everything begins to look like a crisis. And this is why, among other reasons, why a lot of my clients will wake up in the morning exhausted, no matter how much sleep they get. And this exhaustion is not sustainable. It's a bone tired, kind of a Groundhog's Day kind of exhaustion where every day the alarm goes off at 6 a.m. over and over and over and over. So we hear people say, I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. With respect to disconnection, what we mean is disengagement from the company mission, values, goals, from your individual role. It's also usually a disengagement from important relationships. So a disengagement from one's business partners or leadership team, a disengagement even from customers, investors, etc. And we also usually see this at home. There's disengagement with loved ones, and there's usually a tax to pay at that end too. So people say, I feel misunderstood or underappreciated by my coworkers. There's sort of a victim mentality that often creeps up. And in the negativity and cynicism piece, there's sort of a depersonalization of the people that we work with and for, including our customers and shareholders and whatnot. And we stop caring about relationships in the way that we once did. And there is often a very deep resentment formed towards coworkers, business partners, et cetera. And also, unfortunately, at home. And ultimately, there's a sense of hopelessness that is really difficult to combat, especially if you're isolating yourself and not talking to anybody. So I hear people say I'm harder and less sympathetic with people than perhaps they deserve, and that's kind of an understatement. So the way that we break through these three symptoms of burnout are as follows. With respect to exhaustion, we have to recover, but in a different way. Taking a vacation or getting a good night's sleep, taking a long weekend, even taking a sabbatical isn't the way that we recover from the kind of exhaustion that comes from burnout. It's different. And it's really true recovery, and we'll talk about how you do it. Disconnection requires a kind of a forced process of remaining present. And this takes a lot of guts, really, because there is a very strong urge to isolate and disconnect. And the final one, with negativity and cynicism, the answer is personal values, dusting off or perhaps defining your values in a new way and taking action against those values versus letting disturbing thoughts and emotions bully you. So here's what recovery looks like. Recovery periods from chronic stress must be created. And unfortunately, the kinds of recovery periods that we're used to in the United States, at least, is 2 weeks every 50 weeks, basically, or a long weekend, let's say, or maybe a mental health day. But unfortunately, that's not the way the mind and body work with respect to chronic stress. We really have to create these recovery periods, but they have to happen all day, every day. The science is really clear about this. So we don't need to take a 2-week vacation. It's great if you can and you want to, but you don't have to recover from burnout. So these recovery periods must occur multiple times a day, every day, so that we're releasing the stress and releasing the effects of adrenaline, cortisol, et cetera, in our body, to release them throughout the day. not just every 50 weeks. Recovery must also be complete. And by that, I mean the stress has to be completely released in order to prevent it from building up and building up and resulting in this exhaustion. And we'll talk about how that works. Um, One of the ways this complete release happens is there needs to be a psychological detachment from work, not avoiding it, not isolating, but allowing yourself to have periods of freedom from thinking about work. And that's the challenge for most burned out people, and especially with obsessed founders and entrepreneurs, is what we want to do is to think and think and think and think, and maybe worry and worry and worry. And those are kind of the two knobs we know about as entrepreneurs. So it's counterintuitive and sometimes hard to accept, but it really is true that we have to be intentional about not thinking about work multiple times a day, and truly releasing the stress. So we talk about the acceptance of DTEs, which is disturbing thoughts and emotions, basically worry or frustration or anger. The acceptance of these thoughts and emotions is the way that we recover from burnout. But what we tend to do, what the human mind does, is go very quickly to fight or flight. We want to either fix it or avoid it. And
Mhm.
fixing and avoiding is really, really good. And if it's a fire and we have to get out of a burning building. But when the stress is almost entirely created in our minds, or a lot of it's created in our minds, there's no way to fight it or flee from it because it's resting on our shoulders. And so I use this example that it's kind of like saying to yourself, don't think about pink elephants, don't think about pink elephants, don't think about pink elephants. And unfortunately, any attempt to either fight disturbing thoughts and emotions or flee from them actually tattoos them on our brains. And we might have momentary relief, but ultimately it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's kind of like obsessive behavior of any kind, obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a lot of similarities with OCD and burnout. And if you're familiar with people who have problems with hand washing, for example, originally washing one's hands will take care of the thought that says my hands are dirty. But the next time you do it, you have to wash your hands twice, let's say, to have the same effect. And and then three times and four times, and then finally you can't leave the house. And it's very like that when we worry and obsess about business things. The idea is we're going to solve this in our brain, and if it's a real problem, then our brains are perfect for solving real problems. But if it's worry and stress, kind of rehearsing the same doomsday scenario over and over, that's very much like the pink elephants idea. And we actually make the experience, the painful experience of anxiety and depression, go deeper and deeper and deeper, even if we feel a momentary relief. So this is the counterintuitive part. The things that we know to do as action taking entrepreneurs won't help here. Um, we have to accept disturbing thoughts and emotions as being just thoughts and emotions, and we need to let them go. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do that. One of them is the R&R technique. This is a very simple, even for people who can't meditate. This is a 5 to 10 second technique that was all I had in the beginning of my own burnout recovery. And in fact, if anybody asks for our entrepreneurs burnout toolkit, part of one of the elements in that toolkit is this R&R technique, a video describing how to do it. But it's basically just a very simple way that when you notice that you're stressed, to let the tension go. It's really that simple. And the key to it is noticing it versus trying to fix it or trying to avoid it. But fixing and avoiding won't help. If the mind is great for real problems like splitting the atom or changing a tire, but when it comes to worry, our brains can't fix worry because there's nothing to fix, unfortunately. Sometimes there's an action that we can take, but if there isn't, our mind is really useless. Um, So this R&R technique really acknowledges that. And the key to it is noticing that you're feeling stressed, not trying to act your way out of it and not trying to ignore it, but just to face it head on and release it in the moment. This R&R technique is all I had in the beginning, but it's worth its weight in gold, and it's in the toolkit that we're offering. Um, the opposite of disconnection is presence, and to be present to ourselves and notice how we're feeling, but also to be present for other people. And this goes completely contrary to the natural urge to isolate that comes with burnout. Um, so we hear a lot of talk about mindfulness, and people immediately shy away from it because it sounds like meditation, or it has sort of a bad connotation sometimes. But all it really means is being where our hands are and doing what's in front of us to do one thing at a time. Uh, the problem with entrepreneurs, that certainly this is my problem, is that we want to multitask, and multitasking is a myth. No one can multitask. Our brain can only do one thing at a time. We may be able to toggle back and forth very quickly between things, but if you've ever tried to drive a car and do Wordle on your phone, you'll find that you're quickly in the median. So just focusing on one thing at a time is really, really powerful. To notice where your hands are, to notice what you're doing, and to put your heart and soul into it, um, and really to focus on what's right in front of you to do. As we say, be where your hands are. The Pomodoro method is something that's really so good, and a lot of people, you probably are aware of it, John. A lot of people have heard of it, but there was an Italian, speaking of Italy, an Italian engineer who was studying for engineering, and he was a very kind of ADHD kind of guy, like a lot of us are, and he just couldn't concentrate. So the Pomodoro method is simply this. Um, the Pomodoro means tomato in Italian, and it in most Italian kitchens, there's a little plastic tomato that's a timer, and you twist it in the middle, and it counts down the time. And the idea here is to carve your day up into short sprints, where you put all of your energy and attention into one thing for 15 minutes, let's say, and you set the timer. And during that 15 minutes, you discipline yourself to shut off the alarms and notifications on your phone and your computer, and do one thing, work on one project. So this kind of combines mindfulness with productivity. But the Pomodoro method is just incredibly effective. The idea is that you set the alarm for 15 or 30 minutes, and then take an intentional 5-minute break when the alarm goes off. And when it does, we encourage people to get out of their desk, out of their seats, away from their desks, walk around, take a deep breath, do something to take your mind off of your work as completely as possible. But this is very, very simple and very, very effective. Um, and with respect to the final of the triad of symptoms of burnout, the symptom of being cynical, negative, outwardly attacking sometimes, as we get, the solution is values and actions. And this is really the antidote to the victim identity that I talked about earlier. What burns in the hearts of entrepreneurs, and it's really true that it's lonely at the top. It really is lonely at the top. There's no question about it. There's nobody to talk to. And sometimes we can feel victimized and bitter and resentful and take it out on other people. So we can't allow ourselves to stay in that condition, or the burnout won't go away. So the antidote is to focus on our values and on taking deliberate action. So this is actually a quote from Viktor Frankl, who wrote, oh gosh, what did he write? A Search for Meaning.
Yeah, search for meaning.
Search for meaning. Yeah. He said, we can find fulfillment in anything, even in something we don't prefer and wouldn't have chosen, by bringing our values to whatever arises. And he noticed in Man's Search for Meaning that people could survive even death camps in Germany if they could find values that would support their actions. So that's one of the things that we found. We take folks through an exercise where they dust off or maybe rediscover what their top 3 values are, what makes life to them. And we actually create little framed values calligraphied value statements that we ask them to look at every day, because it's a very effective way to get out of your head and into your life and get into what really matters. One of the things that we found is very typical of people in burnout is they tend to be very resentful. I was incredibly resentful towards my team. It's just the most insane thing, but there you are. And what I found that I had to do was to go through a forgiveness process, and we teach one that's very specific. But until you can let go of resentment, you can't break through burnout. And and you also can't break through the isolation and the negativity and the sort of victim identity. So if anybody wants any help, go to burnoutbreakthrough.com, and there's a webinar about what I've talked about today and a lot more. And but as I said, the thing that would be fastest is that we'll send you the um, burnout entrepreneurs burnout toolkit if you will just email me. Oops. If you'll just email me at scott@doubledareyou.us, and we'll send you this pretty complete entrepreneurs burnout toolkit. That's
That's
all I
wonderful.
got, John.
Well, no, this is fantastic. And actually, it did bring up a bunch of questions. So I'm going to ask him. I figured that.
Ask them, man.
By the way, first of all, is burnout, do you see it more in as an American thing versus some of the other cultures where they do tend to take, I mean, I like the line that a lot of Americans live to work versus a lot of the rest
Yes.
of the world works to live, right?
Yeah.
Do you see it as a more American thing? I know you do a decent amount of traveling in Europe.
Yeah, we've had a lot of clients from overseas. I find that there's certain well, normally what happens is it's a person in Europe that's working for an American company. That's
Okay.
almost always the case. I've got a client I'm working with right now in Krakow, Poland, who interestingly is they're 100 miles from the Russian border, or the Ukrainian border. I'm sorry, and all Ukrainians have Russian families living in their houses, so they have reasons to be stressed out. But this woman is stressed out. I think mainly because she's been in there's two things. Part of it is working for a U.S. Multinational company or U.S. based international company. The other is that we found that there are some pretty good predictors of burnout, and one of them has to do with childhood trauma. And that's not always the case, but that's often the case. Particularly if if one of your parents was emotionally abusive. There's a number of predictors that we found, so that even if you're not an American, you might be more apt to suffer from burnout.
Interesting. One of my other questions I have here. So if you're a business partner or spouse, so I think at a time I had a partner way back when, and I think he started a lot of the terms you used. I mean, resent, step away. I mean, the business kind of got over. I'm not sure he was the right person at the right seats once we grew to a certain size. And, I think he was feeling burnout. He couldn't keep up and he couldn't do stuff. I wasn't there. I was still enjoying it. As a partner, if you're noticing one of your other partners, and some of these partners are spouses in the business, I can watch that happen.
That's right. Like, absolutely.
How do you broach the subject of this with somebody you care about and you want it to go? Like, how do you, because I think that natural fight or flight probably of like, I'll just work harder, or I just need that 1 week vacation and I'll be back.
That's right.
It's like that's the common answer, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the thing. So if you're dealing with a partner, potentially a partner spouse, you feel that this might be their issue. What's the best way to bring it to them?
Well, one of the ways that I found works pretty well is to pass on a recording of a conversation like this, to someone that you love or work with, and just tell them, hey, I heard this and it made me think of you. I may be way off, but want you listen to this and see what you think. Because what I find 9 times out of 10 is that people say, that's me. God, I wondered what the hell's the matter with me. And this set of symptoms is kind of unique, and I've got it. So that's one of the best ways. You can also send them. There's various things in our toolkit that you could pass on to people, but and the way that I've seen that really works is just to say, I was watching this, webinar or whatever in Burnout, and it made me think that it might apply to you. Maybe I'm way off, but check it out and let me know what you think. We also you can take our online burnout assessment, and sometimes that helps when people see, wow, this is really me. And it isn't. This isn't the only diagnosis in the world by any means. There's other things that could be happening, but that's a good way to start the conversation.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. How has, well, I guess the concept of, it's interesting to me, like, obviously right now there's this whole tugging thing about going back to the office versus hybrid versus days of the week. Some people are going to 4-day work weeks, but then your stats would suggest like we're more stressed now, or more burnout now, even though like people are like, oh, I don't want to go work. Now we're going to the office was super stressful versus now I'm working from home or working from anywhere. It's less stressful. But how has you seen that? Hey, we do a 4-day work week. Are we going to all be way less stressed? How have you just seen that in the last few years?
I hate to say this because I think it's maybe, I don't mean to be controversial, but really, I mean, as I said before, burnout is really an inside job. And what I've seen is that that if people will use some of the empirically proven techniques that work, again, don't work for a company that's unreasonable or that's toxic or whatever. Of course not. Run away screaming, get out, don't do it, but work is stressful, and I don't know of any jobs that aren't a little bit stressful. And so what I found in working with our clients is that they can go back to the same jobs they were in before in many cases, only now they can really thrive. One of the most horrible things I've seen are business owners who think, okay, I'm going to sell my business, that must be it. you know or sometimes there are folks I've worked with who say, well, I've got to get a divorce. They want to put it on something. I feel this way because of somebody, only to find out that getting divorced didn't help. It made it worse than ever. Selling the company didn't help. It's worse than ever. So really it is an inside job. And the good news is that you don't have to wait for the outside to improve. You can really, some simple things that you can do. And some people, introverts particularly, according to all of the data, introverts like working from home better. But it's not, working at home or 40 work weeks are not a solution in themselves. There are a lot of people that I know, like this woman in Poland that I'm working with, who has a 4-day work week, and when I first met her, she's completely stressed out.
Yeah.
It doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't do what we hope it will do.
Got it. It's interesting you talked about, like, the Pomo method there, whatever, Pomodoro method.
Pomodoro.
I work a lot with one of my clients, and they do Microsoft 365 automation. So I get to know a lot about the Microsoft 365 suite, and they have a thing you can turn on. They have a thing you can turn on called focus time. And
exactly.
What's interesting about it is it just automatically grabs 30 minutes every day and blocks it out for you to have focus time. The thing that freaks people out, and I tell them, sometimes I didn't tell them at first, but now I do tell them, it turns off all your notifications. You will not get inbound email. You will not get nothing's going to happen on your computer for those 30 minutes. It's on. And people are like, I don't know if I can live with that. Like, I don't know. And I'm like, really? You don't think you can just not have any inbound for 30 minutes? I think you're going to find it refreshing.
Oh, absolutely. But this is we talk a lot about addiction today, but really addiction to that kind of stress is as addictive or more addictive than anything else. I was speaking to my wife about this today. We talk about all of the toxic drugs that you can buy illegally today, but the most powerful drugs are the ones we generate in our own minds and bodies. And one of the things that we get addicted to is the adrenaline and the cortisol and all of our own brain chemicals. And we're afraid, a lot of us, and it takes some time to adjust to this, that if I don't have this external stress, that I won't do my job in a peak way. And it takes some time to realize that isn't true. But the brain chemistry is just as addictive as street drugs. And so it's very difficult for people to they feel as though I've got to spur my horse constantly to make it go fast. And even if the sides of our horse are bloody from spurring it every 2 seconds, we still think we have to keep doing this. And I think it really is sort of a combination of addiction and superstition.
Yeah, that instantly reminds me of when I sold that I stayed on the company for a couple of years, and I got guaranteed I was living through some of this world.
Sure.
Afterwards, I gave myself permission. It was weird how I had to do it, like literally write it down and give myself permission that my goal for the next 6 months is to do nothing, like literally nothing. And it probably took me 5 or 6 or 7 weeks before I was comfortable with stillness.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, I was so used to the adrenaline of problem solving, the adrenaline getting on planes, the adrenaline of responding to emails, the adrenaline, all that. It took me 6 or 8 weeks. I always tell people I learned how to walk my dog and notice a flower.
Absolutely.
Because for the 21 years before that, I didn't.
That's right.
Which was sad.
And I understand it. Absolutely. But again, the illusion is that unless we are that focused, we can't perform at a high level. And, I think you're somebody who's a perfect, proof positive that in fact, you can learn to walk your dog and see flowers and so forth and be super productive.
Exactly.
In fact, more productive than ever. But it's the water we're all swimming in. That's, I think, part of the problem with working from home is there's sort of a bias for and against going to work. And if you don't go to work, then you're not really invested. And, there's all kinds of social cultural bullshit that you've proven, and I have too, that it's just not true.
Right.
Really, it's not.
No, this is great. I really appreciate what you shared here today. And I want to encourage everyone to email you at the scott@doubledareyou.us to get the up-to-date entrepreneurial burnout toolkit and probably take the online assessment. I think it'd be very powerful for a lot of us. So thank you very much for taking the time
Thanks,
today,
John.
I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.